Hello, friends. Today I'm talking about narcissistic parents and how they can cause their children to go into the freeze trauma response. Now, we talk a lot about fight or flight. We're more familiar with fight or flight, but I want to talk about freeze and what happens in your adult life if you were in the freeze response in childhood. So if you feel like you think you had narcissistic parents or a chaotic childhood where there was trauma, and if you feel like you might be stuck in the freeze response or that you were at one time, you're going to want to watch this video. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a life and relationship coach. I'm also the founder of the Thriver School of Transformation, which is a monthly membership where we meet live on Zoom and we do the inner work to overcome narcissistic abuse and complex PTSD together. So I'll leave the link there for anyone that's curious about that. So we all have trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and we need them. We don't want to live life without any trauma responses, because then it would be like living without fear. And there have been people that have suffered brain damage, and that part of their brain that registers fear, the amygdala, when it's been affected and they don't have access to it anymore, they don't tend to live long because there's no fear. Okay. So my point is that we need our trauma responses. It's not about not having them. The problem is when they are, or when we are stuck in one. And in this case, I'm talking about the freeze response. So when there's threat, when something is happening that's outside of our ability to cope for whatever reason, whether it's a physical threat or an emotional one, our trauma responses will kick on. And again, the most common ones are fight or flight. But in childhood, if you have a narcissistic parent, those common first go-to trauma responses can actually cause you more harm than good. Because if you try to fight back with a narcissistic parent by standing up for yourself, by being assertive, by putting down a boundary, you're often punished or shamed to an even more severe degree. If you try to avoid the toxic parent, isn't it true that it's almost like the more you try to avoid them, the more they are constantly finding ways to be in your space and be creating chaos around you, right? It's almost like they will gravitate and they will continue poking and poking and poking. So those two trauma responses tend to give children a really negative result. And so the body is still in trauma. The body is still activated because of the abuse. The body is still activated because of the level of stress that the child is undergoing. So the nervous system, the survival areas of your brain kick on and they're like, okay, fight or flight doesn't work. We're going to go into freeze. And freeze can sound like stillness, but it's not. To me, freeze is one of the most challenging trauma responses for a few different reasons. So first of all, what freeze does is it takes all of the energy of fight or flight. Because whenever our nervous system is kicked on, there is a tremendous amount of energy that the body gives out. Okay, so all of that energy gets frozen and compartmentalized down in the body. And the stillness is above all of that energy. But all of this energy is just below the surface. And so somebody that's in a freeze response, because, right, you just stop. You can't say anything. You can't respond. You can't show any emotion because no matter what you do, the narcissistic parent gets mad. So you're stuck in this frozen state with all of this activation in your body, but you're still. In the animal kingdom, that's called tonic immobility, where you think of a gazelle that's about to be eaten by a lion, right? It's running, it's in flight, big time. It's running and running and running. But once it realizes there is nothing, like it's going to get eaten, there's nothing it can do. And I'm sorry for anyone that can't watch those animal videos. I am one of them. Ask my children. I cannot watch those videos, but I just want to explain it because what happens to them happens to us as well. So all of that energy, right, is there in that gazelle, that impala, and it's running, but it realizes it can't outrun the cheetah or whatever it's running from, and it collapses. And if you're one of those people that watches National Geographic, you'll notice that that animal looks dead. The animal, the predator hasn't even killed it yet, but there is a stiffness to that animal. That's the freeze. And to stay that stiff, there is a tremendous amount of energy surging through that animal beneath the surface. So, speaking of the animal kingdom, if another animal comes around and distracts the predator, and the predator now has to fight off another animal that's trying to get to its prey, if that impala is still alive and it sees that that predator is distracted, what will happen is the impala will stand up and there will be a shaking, a very fast shaking of the body, and then it's off. And what the animal did is it discharged all of that energy that was underneath that freeze, and then it's like nothing ever happened. Well, we as humans, if we were in childhood in that freeze response, we have all this energy, but we don't feel like we have energy, right? It's disconnected from us. We feel almost disconnected from our body. We feel like we have no emotions, like somebody turned off the emotional chip in the body. We can't seem to react. We can't seem to feel. We can't seem to be connected. It's a very dissociative state at times. Some of the challenges in adulthood, if you don't recover from the freeze response, you can stay stuck in that tonic immobility where you just can't move. You can't get a hold of your life. Life is passing you by and you can see it, but you just can't seem to connect. And the other thing that can happen, it's almost like you're living life in one never-ending emotional flashback. Your nervous system is stuck on high alert. And then you think of all that energy. I know you don't feel like you have energy, but all of that that's underneath the surface can cause so many problems. It can cause IBS. It can cause gut problems. It can cause pains in the body that no one can explain. But all of those things can be because of the amount of cortisol and adrenaline that is flooding your body when you're stuck in the freeze response. And then when you're healing, another challenge of the freeze response, when you're healing from narcissistic abuse, let's say you finally leave a toxic environment or the toxic person leaves you, and now you're starting to heal. Sometimes you can come out of freeze, and if you don't have the right tools and if you don't understand what's going on, think about going from like 0 to 80 in a second. Think about what that's like to suddenly have all of this activation that you've been disconnected from coming up in the body. It can be very uncomfortable. It can feel as if you're flooded with too much emotion. It's too overwhelming. So it's hard. It is hard. Narcissistic parents, they can cause their children to get stuck in these trauma responses. And these trauma responses don't go away because you grew up and you left your parents' home. Think about a closet that you've been stuffing things in for a long time. And now that closet is stuffed floor to ceiling with things. Like literally, you can't even open the door. You shove so much in that closet. And if you see my arms and they look gross, I apologize. I'm overcoming poison ivy this week. But anyway, so imagine that closet. And it's been closed now because you know that it's full floor to ceiling. You don't open that door anymore, right? But then one day, somebody in your life comes over your house and they open the door. Once that door is open, everything comes tumbling out. You can no longer pretend that, oh, out of sight, out of mind, that stuff's there and I don't have to deal with it. No, it is now, boom, it is in front of you and you have to deal with it. Well, sometimes when you're in the freeze response and you're going through life and you're disconnected, something can happen that can just open the door to everything that's stuffed deep down. And it can, again, cause all of those sensations and that activation to kick on unexpectedly as well. And it can be a lot to handle. So why I'm bringing this up is if you've been through narcissistic abuse in childhood and you've learned a lot about narcissistic parents and you're putting the pieces together, then that is awesome, because that is the first step towards healing, is really understanding what happened outside of you. But I want to take a moment to encourage you to then move into looking at how what they did affected you on the inside. What is the cptsd piece of it that is showing up in your life? What was your trauma response? How is it affecting you in your life? And how is your nervous system now? Because narcissistic abuse isn't just about the person, and it's not just about the emotions from the emotional abuse. It's also the fact that it has changed your nervous system. It has dysregulated your nervous system. And until we can get that autonomic nervous system back in balance, we can feel like we are suffering from narcissistic abuse even years and decades after it ends. So remember that healing is in part the information about them, in part understanding the narcissist, and then a huge part is the cptsd recovery part and learning how to re-regulate. And so that being said, if you find that you're hopping from video to video year after year and you're not seeing any results, I want to invite you to check out the resources in the description box below, as well as the Thriver School of Transformation, because we meet live on Zoom and we talk about how to apply the tools that work together so that you don't have to do it alone. And if you have questions, unlike in a video, you can't ask anybody in the meetings, you can ask, and it's a back and forth interactive membership. So keep those resources in mind, or any others. But the point is, you have to find resources that combine the mind and the body.